The plant your great-grandmother used to heal fever, stop bleeding, and keep her family alive through 2 world wars is probably growing in a ditch 2 miles from your house right now. And in some states, if you pick it or grow it intentionally, you could face a fine. Here's what happened. Somewhere between the rise of the pharmaceutical industry, the industrialization of food, and 3 generations of convenience culture, we quietly handed over the oldest survival knowledge on Earth. The plants that fed civilizations, cured plagues, and kept entire communities alive didn't disappear. They were just gradually made inconvenient, regulated, discouraged, or outright banned. This video gives that knowledge back. Stay with me because number 17 on this list was used by Native American warriors to treat wounds so effectively that Civil War surgeons documented its results, and today it's regulated in 11 states. And number 20. What you're about to hear at the end of this video will make you question why you've never heard of it before. If this is the kind of knowledge you believe the world needs more of, hit subscribe right now. You're not just clicking a button. You're joining people who choose to remember what the rest of the world forgot. Here are 20 plants that are illegal to grow anywhere, ranked from remarkable to absolutely unforgettable. Number 1. Comfrey, Symphytum officinale. The ancient Greeks called it knit bone. Physicians in the Dioscorides tradition, writing around 50 CE in the Mediterranean world, cataloged it as a primary wound-closing herb. The Romans carried it across Europe in their military campaigns because it worked. In 2001, the FDA issued a consumer advisory warning against internal use of comfort products, citing pyrrolizidine alkaloids linked to liver damage in high doses. Supplement companies quietly pulled it from shelves. What had been a kitchen garden staple for nearly 2,000 years was gone from American homes within a decade. Research confirms that allantoin, a compound abundant in comfrey root, accelerates cell proliferation and tissue repair. Studies published in peer-reviewed journals show it outperforms standard wound creams in healing speed for minor cuts and bruises. Traditionally, fresh comfrey leaves were bruised and applied directly to sprains, fractures, and contusions as a poultice. Wrap the bruised leaf in cloth, apply to the skin for 20 to 30 minutes. Never apply to open wounds. Internal consumption is banned by health authorities in Germany, Australia, and Canada. The FDA strongly advises against oral use in the U.S. Topical use on intact skin remains legal but regulated in some supplement markets. We spent decades developing synthetic anti-inflammatory compounds. This plant was doing the same job before Rome fell. Number 2. Sassafras, Sassafras albidum. The Choctaw and Cherokee nations of the American Southeast used sassafras root bark for centuries before European contact. French colonists in Louisiana in the 1600s documented its use as a fever reducer, blood thinner, and spring tonic. It was one of the first American exports to Europe. In 1960, the FDA banned saffrole, the compound responsible for sassafras's distinctive scent and most of its pharmacological activity, from food products. The reason? High doses of isolated saffrole caused liver tumors in rats. Root beer lost its owl flavor. An entire tradition of spring cleansing tonics vanished with one regulatory action. Documented evidence indicates that saffrole has demonstrated antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory properties in laboratory studies. Research suggests the compound shows activity against certain bacteria at controlled doses, though whole food consumption data in humans remains limited. Before the ban, sassafras root bark tea was brewed as a spring tonic, 1 tablespoon of dried root bark simmered in 2 cups of water for 20 minutes. Filtered and drunk warm. Generations of American families used this every March to, as they said, thin the winter blood. Saffrole is listed as a controlled substance precursor in the U.S. because it can be chemically processed into MDMA. Commercial sale of root bark for consumption is federally prohibited. Growing the tree itself is legal, but selling its bark for internal use is not. Your grandmother's root beer tasted like medicine because it was. Number 3. Epizote, Dysphania ambrosioides. The Aztec civilization used epizote medicinally and culinarily for over 1,000 years before Spanish contact in the early 1500s. Its Nahuatl name translates roughly to skunk sweat, a smell they valued because it meant power. It was their primary antiparasitic herb and a staple in every bean dish cooked in Mesoamerica. When Western nutritional science took hold in the 20th century, the emphasis shifted to calories, macronutrients, and standardized medicine. Herbs that didn't fit neatly into clinical trial frameworks were categorized as folk remedies and quietly pushed aside. Epizote never made it out of ethnic grocery stores into mainstream American kitchens. Studies show that ascaridol, a compound found in epizote essential oil, demonstrates significant antiparasitic activity. Research published in ethnopharmacology journals confirms traditional claims about its effectiveness against intestinal parasites, though concentration and dosage matter significantly. A small handful of fresh or dried epizote leaves added to a pot of cooking beans does two things. It dramatically reduces the gas-producing compounds in legumes, and it adds a flavor that Mexican cooks consider non-negotiable. Steep 2 fresh sprigs in boiling water for a simple digestive tea. The essential oil of epizote is highly concentrated and toxic in large amounts. A few drops of pure oil can cause kidney damage. The leaves in culinary quantities are safe. Never consume the essential oil internally. This plant outlived the empire that discovered it, and it's still growing wild across the southern United States right now. Number 4. Wormwood, Artemisia absinthium. Ancient Egyptians documented wormwood in the Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, one of the oldest medical documents in human history. They used it for intestinal parasites, fever, and liver complaints. The Romans named their medicinal wine wormwood wine and served it to military commanders before campaigns. In the early 1900s, absinthe, the famous spirit made with wormwood, was blamed for causing hallucinations, psychosis, and moral collapse across Europe and America. It was banned in the U.S. in 1912 and across most of Europe shortly after. What was actually happening was simple alcohol poisoning from a 140 proof spirit. The wormwood was the scapegoat. Research confirms that absinthin and artabsin, compounds in wormwood, show strong antiparasitic effects. Studies show effectiveness against Plasmodium falciparum, the parasite responsible for malaria, and documented anti-inflammatory activity that rivals some pharmaceutical options. Traditionally, wormwood tea was brewed as a bitter digestive tonic, 1 teaspoon of dried herbs steeped in hot water for 5 minutes, drunk before meals to stimulate bile production and improve digestion. This practice was common in every European herbal tradition through the 19th century. High doses of wormwood cause neurotoxicity. Thujone, a compound in the plant, can cause seizures if consumed in concentrated form. Wormwood-based spirits remain controlled in some states. The herb itself is legal to grow in most of the U.S., but extract products face regulatory scrutiny. Most Americans touch this plant every summer without knowing what it can do. Number 5. Valerian, Valeriana officinalis. Greek physician Hippocrates wrote about valerian root in the 4th century BCE. By the medieval period, European monasteries cultivated it as their primary sleep and anxiety remedy. The name valerian likely derives from the Latin valere, meaning to be strong or healthy. Monks called it the healer. The benzodiazepine family of drugs Valium, Xanax, and their relatives came to market beginning in the 1960s and essentially replaced the entire tradition of botanical sedatives. Physicians had a patentable, precisely dosed alternative. Valerian became something your grandmother kept, not something your doctor recommended. Studies show that valerianic acid in valerian root modulates GABA receptors in the brain, the same mechanism of action as benzodiazepine drugs, but through a different pathway. Research published in sleep medicine journals confirms statistically significant improvements in sleep latency and quality compared to placebo. 1 teaspoon of dried valerian root simmered in hot water for 10 minutes creates a potent sleep tea. Traditional European herbalists recommended drinking it 30 to 45 minutes before bed and noted that the smell, which many find unpleasant, grows on you once you experience the results. Valerian can intensify the effects of alcohol and prescribed sedatives. Do not combine with benzodiazepines or sleep medications without medical guidance. Some people experience paradoxical stimulation rather than sedation. We spent billions developing a synthetic version of something that grew wild and free for 2,400 years. Number 6. Kratom, Mitragyna speciosa. Indigenous communities in Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia used kratom leaves for centuries before Western documentation. Thai farmers in the 19th century chewed fresh leaves daily to sustain energy through manual labor in tropical heat. Local healers used it to manage opium withdrawal, a function they understood empirically before addiction medicine existed as a field. In 2016, the DEA announced emergency scheduling to classify kratom as a Schedule I substance, the same category as heroin. A massive public backlash, including testimony from veterans using it to manage chronic pain and individuals who credited it with helping them leave opioid addiction, forced the agency to withdraw the emergency scheduling. But the battle over its legal status continues in over a dozen states today. Research confirms that mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine, the primary alkaloids in kratom, bind to opioid receptors but with different pharmacological profiles than classical opioids. Studies show documented analgesic effects and preliminary evidence of lower respiratory depression risk compared to pharmaceutical opioids, though research is still developing. Traditional Southeast Asian use involved chewing 2 to 5 fresh leaves or brewing a tea from dried leaf powder. Workers used small doses for stamina, larger doses for pain management. The dose-effect relationship is steep, and important small amounts are stimulating, large amounts are sedating. Kratom is currently banned in Alabama, Arkansas, Indiana, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Wisconsin. It interacts dangerously with opioids, benzodiazepines, and alcohol. Cases of dependence and withdrawal have been documented. Adulterated commercial products have caused serious harm. Research your state's current legal status before approaching this plant. A plant that helped farmers survive brutal labor for centuries became a Schedule I target, then the public fought back. The fight isn't over. Number 7. Pennyroyal, Mentha pelagium. Pennyroyal was documented in ancient Rome by Pliny the Elder around 77 CE. Romans hung it in sick rooms to purify the air, used it as a flea repellent. The name itself is derived from the Latin for flea, and employed it medicinally for digestive complaints, colds, and delayed menstruation. It was one of the most widely used herbs across the entire ancient world. Pennyroyal became so closely associated with its abortifacient properties in the early 20th century that its legitimate traditional uses were largely buried under controversy. As reproductive health became politically charged, the entire knowledge base around pennyroyal, including its very real and documented uses for digestion, pest control, and respiratory complaints, was effectively suppressed in mainstream herbal literature. Studies show that pulgone, pennyroyal's active compound, demonstrates significant antimicrobial and insecticidal activity. Research confirms it repels mosquitoes and fleas with effectiveness comparable to DEET at similar concentrations. Documented evidence indicates antispasmodic properties that support its traditional use for digestive complaints. Fresh pennyroyal leaves crushed and rubbed on exposed skin repel mosquitoes and ticks effectively for 1 to 2 hours. A small sachet of dried pennyroyal placed in closets or drawers functions as a natural moth and flea repellent, a practice documented in household management books through the early 1900s. Pennyroyal essential oil is acutely toxic. It has caused liver failure and death in women who attempted to use concentrated oil as an abortifacient. Even small amounts of the pure oil are dangerous. The leaves in culinary quantities are generally safe. The oil is not. This is a critical distinction. Your grandmother had a name for this. She kept it in her linen closet. We forgot to ask her why. Number 8. Khat, Catha edulis. Khat cultivation in the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula dates back to at least the 13th century CE. Sufi mystics in Yemen used it during nighttime prayer sessions to maintain focus and wakefulness. Ethiopian physicians documented its use for fatigue, depression, and appetite suppression well before European explorers arrived in the region. When Somali, Yemeni, and Ethiopian diaspora communities began immigrating to the United States and Europe in the late 20th century, they brought khat with them as a cultural practice. Western drug enforcement agencies classified cathinone, the active compound, as a Schedule I substance in 1993, criminalizing a plant deeply embedded in the cultural and social fabric of entire populations. Research confirms that cathinone and cathine, the primary alkaloids in khat, produce stimulant effects through dopamine and norepinephrine pathways similar to amphetamines. Studies document improvements in alertness, mood, and fatigue reduction in controlled settings. Long-term daily use is associated with dependence and cardiovascular stress. Traditional use involves chewing fresh young leaves and stems for 30 to 90 minutes, allowing the juices to absorb through the oral mucosa. The plant must be fresh. The active compounds degrade within 48 to 72 hours of harvest. This is why khat has never been effectively commercialized in dried form. Khat is a Schedule I controlled substance in the United States, Canada, and most of Europe. Possession or cultivation is a felony offense. Fresh plant material is confiscated at U.S. borders. This is one of the most widely criminalized cultural plants in the world. An entire civilization's social ritual older than the United States by 4 centuries became a federal felony because of one compound. Number 9. Blue lotus, Nymphaea caerulea. The blue lotus was sacred in ancient Egypt for over 3,000 years. Depicted in hieroglyphics, carved into temple walls at Karnak, and found in the tomb of Tutankhamun, it was the flower of the sun god Ra and was used in religious ceremonies to induce states of calm euphoria and heightened awareness. Egyptian priests consumed it in wine before ceremonial rites. When Egyptology became a Western academic pursuit in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the psychoactive properties of the blue lotus were largely downplayed or ignored. It was classified as decorative art, not pharmacological record. The flower that shaped one of the greatest civilizations in human history was reduced to a motif. Studies show that nuciferine and apomorphine, compounds found in blue lotus, interact with dopamine and serotonin receptors. Research suggests mild antispasmodic and sedative effects. Documented evidence indicates the plant's alkaloid profile supports anxiolytic activity, consistent with its traditional use in ceremonial relaxation. Historically, blue lotus petals and stamens were steeped in wine for several hours, sometimes days. Modern herbal preparations use a tea of dried petals steeped for 15 to 20 minutes. The effect is described as mild relaxation and gentle mood elevation, nothing dramatic, but distinctly calming. Blue lotus is not scheduled at the federal level in the United States, but Louisiana and some other states have banned it specifically. It is not approved for human consumption by the FDA, and some products sold as blue lotus are adulterated with synthetic compounds. Verify the source before use. This plant outlived every empire that discovered it and was sacred to a civilization that built monuments still standing for 1,000 years later. Number 10. Foxglove, Digitalis purpurea. Welsh folk healers used foxglove for heart-related swelling as far back as the 10th century CE. The physicians of Midfay, a famous line of Welsh herbalists, documented its use in their medical texts. William Withering, an English physician, formalized this folk knowledge in 1785 after observing a village healer use it to treat dropsy, what we now call congestive heart failure. Foxglove's active compounds, the cardiac glycosides digoxin and digitoxin, were isolated and standardized by pharmaceutical companies in the early 20th century. Once the compound could be made in a lab, the knowledge of how to grow and use the whole plant became unnecessary to the medical establishment. The plant itself became a curiosity, or a danger. Research confirms that digoxin from foxglove remains an FDA-approved medication for heart failure and atrial fibrillation to this day. It is one of the few cases where a traditional herbal remedy was so effective that it was adopted directly into mainstream medicine without modification. Traditional Welsh healers created a controlled decoction from dried leaves, but this is not a preparation anyone should attempt today. The therapeutic dose of foxglove is dangerously close to the toxic dose. This is a plant best understood and respected from a distance, but knowing its story matters. Foxglove is acutely toxic. All parts of the plant, leaves, flowers, seeds, roots, contain cardiac glycosides that can cause fatal heart arrhythmias at doses only slightly above the therapeutic range. Children have died from drinking water from a vase containing foxglove flowers. This plant demands absolute respect. The drug your cardiologist may prescribe today is still being extracted from the same flower Welsh healers used 1,000 years ago. They just stopped telling you where it came from. Number 11. Salvia divinorum. The Mazatec people of Oaxaca, Mexico, have used Salvia divinorum in religious healing ceremonies for centuries, possibly millennia. Their shamans, called curanderos, consumed the plant in carefully controlled ritual settings to enter visionary states used for diagnosis and healing. The plant was essentially unknown outside Oaxaca until ethnobotanist R. Gordon Wasson documented it in the 1960s. After Salvia divinorum appeared on YouTube in the mid-2000s in videos showing users having chaotic, uncontrolled experiences, a wave of state-level legislation swept the country. The plant went from almost total obscurity to one of the most legislated psychoactive plants in the U.S. in less than 5 years. The ceremonial context, the entire framework that made its traditional use meaningful and safe, was completely absent from public discourse. Research confirms that salvinorin A, the active compound in Salvia divinorum, is the most potent naturally occurring psychedelic compound yet identified. Uniquely, it operates through kappa-opioid receptors rather than serotonin receptors, a completely novel mechanism. Studies suggest potential applications in addiction treatment and neurological research. Traditional Mazatec use involves chewing fresh leaves slowly and deliberately in a quiet, dark ceremonial setting, not smoking concentrated extracts recreationally. The distinction matters profoundly. Everything about the traditional context, silence, intention, experience guidance, was designed to make the experience navigable. Salvia divinorum is a Schedule I controlled substance in Alabama, Delaware, Florida, Illinois, Kansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Virginia. Even in states where it remains legal, the concentrated extract products sold commercially bear little resemblance to traditional use. A ceremony practiced quietly in the mountains of Mexico for 1,000 years became a viral video and a federal target in the span of 1 decade. Number 12. Aconite, Aconitum napellus. Ancient Chinese medicine incorporated aconite, known as Fu Zi in medical texts dating back to the Shenong Benchao Jing, compiled around 200 CE, though oral traditions extend further. Greek physicians used it for pain management and as an arrow poison. In small, precisely prepared doses, it was one of the primary analgesic herbs of the ancient world. As pharmaceutical analgesics became available in the 20th century, aspirin in 1899, opioids shortly after, NSAIDs in the 1960s, the ancient tradition of precision-dosed botanical analgesia was abandoned. Aconite's reputation as a poison dominated its identity in Western culture, and the sophisticated preparation techniques that made it medicinal were not transmitted to the next generation. Studies show that aconitine and related alkaloids have documented local anesthetic properties. Research confirms this mechanism, which is similar to lidocaine's action on sodium channels. Traditional Chinese medicine continues to prescribe processed aconite root detoxified through specific preparation methods with documented clinical outcomes. In traditional Chinese medicine, aconite root undergoes mandatory processing, prolonged cooking with other herbs, or specific detoxification methods before clinical use. This processing reduces aconitine content by up to 90%. The processed root is then used in formulas for cold pattern pain, arthritis, and circulatory disorders. Raw aconite is one of the most acutely toxic plants in the world. Skin absorption of the fresh plant can cause cardiac arrhythmia. Several poisoning deaths occur annually from improperly prepared aconite products. Never handle or consume raw or unprocessed aconite. This is not a plant for self-medication under any circumstances. One of the most sophisticated medical traditions in human history built a pharmacology around this plant that Western science is only now beginning to understand. Number 13. Hemp cannabis, Cannabis sativa industrial. Hemp cultivation in China dates to at least 2700 BCE, possibly earlier. The Chinese Emperor Shun Nung documented its medicinal properties in texts that predated the Roman Empire. Vikings used hemp rope and sail. Colonial America required farmers to grow it. George Washington cultivated it at Mount Vernon. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence on hemp paper. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 effectively criminalized hemp alongside psychoactive cannabis, despite industrial hemp containing virtually no THC. The legislation promoted by figures with financial interests in synthetic fiber industries eliminated an entire agricultural tradition that had sustained American farming for 3 centuries. It took until the 2018 Farm Bill to partially restore what was destroyed in a single congressional session. Research confirms that hemp-derived CBD demonstrates measurable anti-inflammatory, anxiolytic, and anticonvulsant properties. Studies published in peer-reviewed journals support its use for anxiety reduction and certain seizure disorders. The FDA has approved one CBD-based pharmaceutical, Epidiolex, for treatment-resistant epilepsy. Industrial hemp seed oil, cold-pressed from the seeds, is one of the most nutritionally complete plant oils available, with an ideal ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids. It was a standard cooking oil in American and European kitchens before Prohibition. Adding 2 tablespoons daily to food or smoothies provides a complete essential fatty acid profile. Even after the 2018 Farm Bill, hemp cultivation requires federal licensing and THC content must remain below 0.3%. State laws vary significantly. Idaho, Mississippi, and South Dakota still maintain restrictive policies that could affect legal status. Growing without a license remains a federal violation. We outlawed a plant that clothed civilizations, fueled ships, and could have replaced petroleum-based plastics because someone needed to sell nylon. Number 14. Peyote, Lophophora williamsii. Archaeological evidence from the Shumla Caves in Texas suggests peyote use by indigenous peoples of the Chihuahuan Desert region dating back at least 5,700 years, making it one of the oldest documented ritual plant uses in the Americas. The Huichol, Tarahumara, and other nations of northern Mexico have maintained continuous ceremonial traditions with this plant across that entire span. The American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978 was supposed to protect indigenous ceremonial practices, but it took until 1994 to specifically protect peyote use for members of the Native American Church. For non-Native Americans, peyote remains a Schedule I controlled substance. The oldest continuous plant ceremony in the Western Hemisphere is protected for some citizens and criminalized for others based on ancestry. Research confirms that mescaline, peyote's primary alkaloid, produces profound alterations in perception and consciousness through serotonin receptor pathways. Studies suggest documented potential for treating PTSD, depression, and addiction. Johns Hopkins and NYU have produced recent research supporting the therapeutic potential of this compound class. Traditional Huichol ceremony involves consuming the buttons, the above-ground portions of the cactus, in a carefully structured multi-day ritual combining prayer, fasting, and communal support. The context is not recreational. It is diagnostic, therapeutic, and deeply embedded in a cultural framework that took centuries to develop. Peyote is a Schedule I controlled substance in the United States for all non-Native Americans. Cultivation, possession, or distribution is a felony. The plant grows extremely slowly. A mature button takes 10 to 15 years to grow, and wild populations are critically endangered due to overharvesting and habitat loss. The oldest plant ceremony in North America is federally protected for some Americans and federally criminalized for others. That is not a footnote. That is the headline. Pause here. Just for a moment. Look at this list and ask yourself something. Is it an accident that so many of these plants used by healers in ancient Egypt, by Aztec physicians, by Native American warriors, by Pacific Island ceremonial leaders, are now either banned, regulated, or buried in folk remedy obscurity? The knowledge wasn't just lost. In many cases, it was replaced. Sometimes by something synthetic. Sometimes by nothing at all. Tell me in the comments which plant on this list shocked you the most and why. I read every single one. And if you're watching this and realizing that someone in your family used to know things that no one in your household knows anymore, that is not nostalgia. That is a gap we can choose to close. Back to the list. Number 15, Iboga, Tabernanthe iboga. The Bwiti tradition of the Fang and Mitsogo peoples of Gabon and Cameroon has used iboga root bark in multi-day initiation ceremonies for at least several centuries, possibly much longer. Initiates consume large quantities of the root bark to experience what the tradition describes as a death and rebirth, a confrontation with the deepest parts of the self that functions as both healing and rite of passage. Ibogaine, the active compound in iboga, was legal in the United States until 1967, when it was caught in the broad sweep of the Controlled Substances Act scheduling process. This happened just as early research was suggesting it might be uniquely effective for treating heroin addiction, a conclusion that has been substantially supported by clinical research in the decades since, conducted in countries where it remains legal. Studies show that ibogaine interrupts opioid withdrawal almost completely, dramatically reducing or eliminating acute withdrawal symptoms in documented clinical settings in Mexico, Canada, and Europe. Research suggests it may reset addictive neural pathways through a mechanism unlike any existing pharmaceutical. Multiple peer-reviewed studies report sustained abstinence rates that no approved medication approaches. Ibogaine treatment for addiction is available in clinics in Mexico, Canada, and several European countries. The treatment involves medical supervision because ibogaine carries real cardiac risks. Is not a home remedy, but understanding that it exists and that thousands of Americans have traveled abroad to access it is itself important knowledge. Ibogaine is a Schedule I substance in the United States. It carries genuine medical risk cardiac arrhythmia that makes unsupervised use dangerous. Several deaths have occurred in uncontrolled settings. Medical supervision with pre-screening cardiac evaluation is non-negotiable. This is not a plant to experiment with independently. A plant that may solve the opioid crisis is classified the same as heroin in the United States, while clinics in Mexico use it to save lives every week. Number 16, opium poppy, Papaver somnifera. The Sumerians of Mesopotamia called the opium poppy hull gill the joy plant as early as 3400 BC. Is one of the oldest cultivated plants in human history. The ancient Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and Chinese all built pharmacological traditions around it. For 5,000 years before the modern opioid crisis, this plant was humanity's primary pain medicine. The Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914 began the criminalization of opium in America. What followed over the next century was not the elimination of opioid suffering, but its transfer from plant-based medicines people understood and respected to pharmaceutical opioids that corporations could patent, market, and oversell. The Sackler family's role in the OxyContin epidemic was documented in court. The plant that started it all is now federally illegal to cultivate with seed pods. Research confirms that morphine, codeine, and thebrine, all derived from opium poppies, remain among the most effective analgesic compounds ever identified. Thebaine is the precursor to oxycodone, hydrocodone, and naloxone. Every opioid pharmaceutical on the market today begins with this flower. It is legal to grow ornamental poppies in most U.S. states. The plants are widely sold as Papaver somniferum in garden centers. What is illegal is the intentional extraction of latex from the seed pods. The line between ornamental cultivation and controlled substance production is legally thin and seriously enforced. Intentional cultivation of opium poppies for latex extraction is a federal felony. Even growing them without extraction can result in prosecution if intent is demonstrated. Some states have additional regulations. The DEA has prosecuted gardeners. This is not theoretical. Every synthetic opioid that fueled the deadliest drug crisis in American history traces its chemistry back to one flower that grows 3 feet tall and blooms in spring. Number 17. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium. Yarrow is named for Achilles, the Greek hero who, according to Homer's Iliad, used it to stop the bleeding of his soldiers' wounds in the Trojan War. Archaeological evidence from a Neanderthal burial site at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, dated to 60,000 years ago, included what researchers identified as yarrow pollen alongside other medicinal plants, suggesting use that may predate modern humans. Native American tribes, including the Navajo, Cherokee, Ojibwe, and dozens of others, documented over 50 distinct medical applications for yarrow in ethnobotanical records. Civil War field surgeons documented seeing Native American warriors use it for wound care with notably better outcomes than the surgeon's own methods. This documentation sits in military archives. It was not transferred into medical education. Studies show that yarrow contains achillin, achillicin, and several flavonoids with documented hemostatic blood clotting properties. Research confirms anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and antipyretic activity. Documented evidence indicates effectiveness for heavy menstrual bleeding in clinical settings. Fresh yarrow leaves, bruised or chewed slightly to break cell walls, applied directly to a bleeding wound, form a natural hemostatic compress. This is the exact technique used by field medics for thousands of years across dozens of cultures. The plant grows wild across virtually all of North America. Yarrow is regulated as a controlled or restricted plant in 11 U.S. states due to its appearance and habitat overlap with poison hemlock, which is acutely toxic. Proper identification is essential. The feathery leaves and flat-topped white flower clusters are distinctive, but beginners should confirm identification with an expert before use. Yarrow can also trigger allergic reactions in people sensitive to plants in the Asteraceae family. This plant has been stopping blood for longer than recorded history. It's growing in a field near you right now. The question is whether you'd recognize it in an emergency. Number 18. Kava, Piper methysticum. Kava has been cultivated and consumed ceremonially in the Pacific Islands, Fiji, Vanuatu, Tonga, Samoa, and Hawaii for at least 3,000 years. Pacific Island chieftains used it to open diplomatic negotiations, seal alliances, and mark every significant community transition from birth to death. Captain James Cook documented elaborate kava ceremonies during his Pacific voyages in the 1770s. In 2002, European regulatory agencies and the FDA issued warnings about kava following reports of liver damage in some consumers. Most of the cases involved products using stem peel and leaf extracts rather than traditional root preparations, a critical distinction that was entirely lost in the reporting. Germany banned it outright. Kava bars and Pacific Island communities in Hawaii watched their traditional social medicine become a liability overnight. Research confirms that cavalactones, the active compounds in kava root, produce anxiolytic and sedative effects through mechanisms involving GABA receptors and sodium channels. Studies published in psychiatric journals show statistically significant anxiety reduction comparable to pharmaceutical anxiolytics without causing cognitive impairment or dependence at traditional doses. Traditional kava preparation involves kneading ground or pounded kava root in cold water and straining it through a cloth to produce a cloudy beverage drunk in a ceremonial bowl called a bilo. The traditional root preparation is considered significantly safer than standardized extract products. Kava is not recommended for daily use beyond 2 to 3 months without breaks. Rare cases of liver toxicity have been documented primarily with extract products using non-root plant parts. It interacts with alcohol and benzodiazepines. Germany banned and later partially lifted restrictions. The FDA advises rare potential for liver damage even with traditional preparations. A plant that built 3,000 years of Pacific civilization was nearly eliminated from legal commerce because someone was using the wrong part of it. Number 19. Coca, Erythroxylum coca. Coca leaf cultivation in the Andean civilizations of South America dates back at least 8,000 years based on archaeological evidence from coastal Peru. The Inca Empire incorporated coca into every dimension of their civilization: religious ceremony, labor management, medicine, and as the primary form of payment for state workers who built Machu Picchu and the Andean Road Network. In 1914, the Harrison Narcotics Act classified cocaine, the isolated alkaloid from coca, as a controlled substance. The entire leaf went with it. The Andean tradition of chewing whole coca leaves, which produces mild stimulation roughly comparable to strong coffee, was conflated with cocaine addiction. 8,000 years of sophisticated botanical knowledge became federally illegal in the United States. Research confirms that whole coca leaf consumption, as traditionally practiced, does not produce the rapid, intense effects associated with cocaine. Studies document that chewing leaves produces stable, low blood concentrations of cocaine alkaloids that provide sustained energy, appetite suppression, and altitude sickness relief without the addiction profile of the isolated compound. The distinction between the leaf and the isolated alkaloid is pharmacologically significant. In Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia, coca leaf tea remains completely legal and is served in hotels as a standard remedy for altitude sickness at high elevation. Traditional Andean chewing involves a small wad of leaves with a small amount of alkaline material baking soda, or ash, which activates the alkaloids. The practice is inseparable from Andean cultural identity. Coca leaf in any form, dried, extracted, or fresh, is a Schedule II controlled substance in the United States. Import, cultivation, or possession is a federal felony. The DEA actively monitors and seizes shipments at ports of entry. The legal distinction between the whole leaf and cocaine is not recognized in American law. We criminalized a leaf that built empires, fed armies, and sustained mountain communities for 8,000 years because we couldn't separate it from what a laboratory did to it. Number 20. Silphium, Ferula extinct, likely Ferula tingitana or related. Silphium was the most valuable plant in the ancient world. Grown exclusively on the rocky soil of the Cyrenaica region of modern Libya, it was the primary export of the Greek colony of Cyrene and was traded across the entire Mediterranean world from at least 700 BC. It appears on Cyrenaican coins in the writings of Pliny, Theophrastus, and Dioscorides, and in Roman medical texts as the supreme remedy for coughs, fevers, pain, digestion, and most significantly birth control. Silphium was consumed to extinction by the Roman Empire. The demand was simply too great. Roman emperors stored it in the treasury alongside gold and silver. Julius Caesar is documented to have seized the entire Roman treasury reserve of silphium, approximately 680 kilograms, upon entering Rome in 49 BC. By 100 CE it was gone. The exact species was never recovered. The most valuable plant in human history was consumed faster than it could reproduce, and no one knew how to grow it anywhere else. Modern researchers analyzing ancient descriptions and known chemical properties of related Ferula species suggest silphium likely contained compounds with genuine contraceptive activity. Studies of related species in the Ferula genus, particularly Ferula asafoetida, confirm documented uterotonic and hormonal effects. Research published in botanical and pharmacological journals suggests that at least some of the ancient claims about silphium's contraceptive properties have a legitimate biochemical basis. There's no practical use to offer here. That is precisely the point. The most sought-after plant in the ancient world, the one that funded a civilization, shaped Mediterranean trade for 7 centuries, and represented the pinnacle of what pre-industrial humanity knew about plant medicine, is gone. We ate it into oblivion. Every preparation, every dose, Every traditional use died with the last plant. Silphium's extinction is the warning. Is the clearest possible demonstration of what happens when a society treats its most valuable natural resource as inexhaustible. Several related feral species are currently endangered due to overharvesting for their similar, though less potent properties. The pattern is repeating. We didn't lose this plant because someone banned it. We lost it because we consumed it until there was nothing left. That is the oldest mistake in the human story, and we are making it again. 20 plants, 20 stories, and every single one of them points to the same truth. The knowledge your ancestors carried was not primitive. It was sophisticated, specific, and hard-won across thousands of years of direct observation. What we call lost knowledge was, in most cases, replaced by systems that could be patented, marketed, and sold back to you at a price. The plants were always there. They didn't go anywhere. We just stopped looking. Here is your challenge starting today. Find one plant from this list that grows within 10 miles of where you live. Learn to identify it. Learn its history. Not to use it just to know it. Because the first step in recovering lost knowledge is remembering that it existed. You cannot search for something you believe is gone. If this video changed the way you see the world around you, or even just the way you see that patch of weeds in your yard, hit the like button. That one action helps more people find this knowledge. Drop a comment right now. Which plant on this list hit you hardest? Was it the one we ate into extinction, or the one that could solve the opioid crisis but remains federally illegal? I will read every one. And if you believe that this kind of knowledge belongs in the world, that the plants your great-grandparents knew deserve to be remembered, subscribe. You're not joining a channel. You're joining people who choose to remember what the rest of the world decided to forget. The plants never forgot us. The only question is whether we remember them in time.